Good morning. Did y'all just come from the keynote? Good chat, right? Anybody have a favorite quote from our favorite friend Bob? No, wrong crowd for that. All right. So this session is about enterprise agility. Can open collaboration save the day? So let's welcome Chris Kondo from Forrester, Molly Hellerman, and Jenna Cline from Atlassian.
All right.
Thank you.
All righty. So I made the mistake of opening the wrong email. All right. Thank you all for coming today. My name's Chris Kondo, Principal Analyst with Forrester Research. I cover all things application development and delivery. If you read any of my research, you know I do a lot of writing about DevOps, value stream management. But last year, I got approached by Atlassian for some custom research they wanted to do about open collaboration. And I was really struck by this. Like, this is really interesting. And they really wanted to find out, what's going on, how do you build high-performing teams, how does collaboration help that, and how does their culture, which is all about being open and honest in communication across all different sort of horizontal and vertical reporting lines, how does that benefit a company, since they've kind of felt internally that there was a lot of benefit to that. So let me just give you some of the stats. We surveyed 750 IT and engineering leaders at the enterprise scale companies. Forrester, a lot of our work is with enterprise scale companies. Most of the cool kids that live in Silicon Valley don't need to talk to me about how to develop software. They know how to do it really well. And what we found is that culture, process, technology that support a robust collaboration are often really ineffective or inconsistent at most enterprises. And so it's a real blind spot for many enterprise leaders. And so we decided to have a research report on it, got some really cool results that you'll be hearing about. And now we're having this talk with Molly and Jenna, and I'm really excited to have them here today with me. And I'm glad that they invited me to be the moderator here. So thank you very much, and we'll let them introduce themselves.
Awesome, thank you. I'm actually going to introduce Jenna because she would be far too modest if she did it herself. I've also been asked to be short on the intro so we can actually get to the content. But so I'll say this. If you want someone on your team and you want to get it done and you want someone who is going to drive tenaciously to make it happen, this is the woman you want on your team. She has that fancy title down there, Head of IT Architecture, Planning, and Innovation. But essentially what that means is everything that's happening in IT, it's because of Jenna. I know Archana, the CIO, is in here somewhere, yeah, okay. But I confirmed with her that that is true. Figurehead actually getting it done. One of the things that I think this group would actually find super interesting is Jenna is driving our products to be better. Like the whole thing that she's trying to do is be better for IT, make it work for Atlassian so that it will work better for our customers. And that I find super exciting because it's hard to do. So I'm super excited to be here with her. I will stop there, but happy to talk more Jenna love after the session.
Aw, get a little sad, a little cry. I get to introduce Molly, which is awesome because I met Molly very early when I joined Atlassian about 3.5 years ago. I was told I had to meet Molly. As soon as I met her, I knew why. To this day, when new people join my team, I tell them, you have to meet Molly. She knows everyone at the company. She personifies collaboration. She says, I help make our products better. I think Molly helps make Atlassian better. She genuinely loves and appreciates the company, and you can see it in everything she does. And I got to see her superpower of getting people to collaborate and work better together when we were going fully remote forever ago. Right at the start of the pandemic, it feels like forever ago. And she took a huge thing, which is how are we going to make this company that's growing, that's global, that's going through a pandemic like the whole world is, and how are we going to actually make our workforce a distributed model in the true sense of the word? And she brought people together from all over the company to make that happen. She got us to work together without us even realizing she was getting us to work together. And it accelerated our journey. And I just was so appreciative of being part of that team. And being up here on a panel with Molly and with Chris is definitely one of the highlights of my last 4 years. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Awesome.
Thanks.
So I don't know if you noticed the nuance here, but the head of IT and the head of innovation work together. They collaborate together. They actually like each other. That's kind of a nice new twist, right? So As you know, remote and distributed work has kind of taken over the world for knowledge workers, engineers, and whatnot. We've had it happen at Forrester. I want to ask you two ladies, to begin with, how has the shift to remote distributed world affected collaboration? With this change, how can we enable greater enterprise collaboration?
Yeah, if it's okay, Chris, I'm going to turn this around on the audience and ask them
Please
a
do.
question. Okay.
Yeah, let's find out what they're thinking.
This is something I've asked a lot of our customer calls and roundtables that we've hosted from Atlassian over the last 2 years, and it really gives us a sense of the shift that we've all experienced during the pandemic. So let me ask the room, by a show of hands, how many of you at the company you're at were you a we don't really turn cameras on kind of company? Before the pandemic, like you really didn't turn cameras? Quite a few. Quite a few, okay. Today, how many of you are, we generally, we turn our cameras on now. This is what we do. And there we go, most of the room. That's huge. I think it's a great example. I think for years, even when I worked in collaboration and communication IT, we were always trying to get people to turn their cameras on. The pandemic was a forcing function to make that happen, and you can see it in the room.
Yeah, and so for those watching digitally, it was pretty much the whole room raised their hand, whereas before it wasn't. Let me sort of get back to your question a little bit.
Yeah.
And so when I look at actually collaboration, I think it hasn't changed, right? We still have this concept of people, practices, tools, and that is making up a healthy collaboration environment. However, what I have seen change is the intentionality, and that everything we do is very intentional, at least my observation of this. I don't know if you all agree, but you don't happen upon someone anymore. You don't just walk by a whiteboard and see something, or you don't pass someone's desk. If you want to check in on a project, you actually have to go read a page or have a meeting or ping someone, or if someone just had a birthday or their dog was sick, and you want to check in, you have to write to them. You have to say, how is that going? And so the question, I think, actually becomes, how can we use that intentionality to our advantage to collaborate better? And so if we go back to those three things of the people, the practices, and the tools, some of the questions you might ask are, from a people perspective, how are you hiring and training people differently? Right? So when you think about all the managers at your organization, for example, just to give an example, I don't know any manager that we actually hired to be a remote manager. Right? Many of you are managers. Were you hired because you have that skill of hiring people who are in remote and distributed settings? Probably not. But how are we supporting them? How are we helping them be better at what they're doing? On the practices side, a question you might ask would be, have we evolved our practices? Or are we still doing the same things? So again, a great example from Atlassian is we have a quarterly business review. And that used to be something where 140 senior leaders would get together for a day and a half, watch videos, participate in conversation, and basically block out that time. And now what we do is we have a Confluence page that has all the content. It has links to other pages. It has a video that describes what's happening. We collect all the questions in those pages. We then have a Q&A async that is recorded on a Loom or a Zoom or pick your, depending on who's doing it, what it looks like. And then we're able to really generate questions and work closely together in a very different way that makes sense for people and allows people to interact with the material differently. And then on the tool side, it seems like an easy one, but have you changed your tools? Have you looked to find the fit for purpose tools of how you're working now, recognizing everyone's working differently? I could talk a lot about this, but I know this is your wheelhouse, so let me turn it over to you.
IT people do like tooling. We get a
you
lot
go.
of requests for that. I think of the intentionality you mentioned, Molly, is very interesting to me because I feel like, especially in the last 2 years, there was two parts to the intentionality. The first was, holy cow, how are we going to make this happen? Like, we still need to collaborate. We still need to close the books. We still need to get laptops to people. And in order, you can't collaborate if you don't have a laptop, right? Like, that's step one, is I need to get my tools to get that. We had to figure out how to get laptops to people during the start of the pandemic super quickly. We had a number of contingency plans. We burned through them in 48 hours. And then we finally loaded up a car with laptops, and somebody drove to Oakland, his apartment in Oakland, and turned into a distribution center. Like, we were just scrappy in getting it done. And after we got over that, now it's more into the, well, how are we going to make this happen? How it's not just bringing us to parity with how we were using our tools before, but how can we get even better and offer new things? How can we make sure that our experience, from an IT point of view, that we're delivering an amazing experience so people don't have to worry about the tooling? They can just do their job. They can collaborate with their coworkers. We noticed about a year ago, and this is a little embarrassing considering we're Atlassian, but we had spun up 14 different service desks in IT. And we were putting the burden on the end user to figure out where to go to get help. And so now if you can imagine you're in your house, you're not sitting next to somebody, it's hard to figure out where to go, we're being more global. We took the opportunity to say, let's redo this experience of getting help so that people can onboard quickly, can get the tools they need. And we brought those 14 service desks down to one, and we introduced one point of entry for IT. So it was intentionality was, yeah, let's get over it, let's make sure everybody's got their tools, and let's even strive to do better and remove even thinking about the tools, and let's just collaborate.
Which was amazing as a user, I will say,
Oh, thank
having
you.
the one year to it. So
That's
thank
awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. So intentionality, it sounds like leadership endorsement to make these changes, trust, all of those things are really important aspects of it. I'm going to shift gears a little bit. Now, people who know me, I'm from the East Coast. I don't shop at Whole Foods, I shop at Market Basket. And because I just want to get in, get my groceries, and get the hell out. I don't need all the BS. And one of the things that really resonated with me is something I was reading about Atlassian, is that their core value is open collaboration, open company, no bullshit. So how do you define that, and what are its core values, or core tenets?
Around open collaboration, and then how does it tie into the open company, no BS?
Yeah.
Yeah, so open collaboration is an interesting term, right? It took me, like when we first started talking about the concept of open collaboration months ago, I wasn't convinced. I was like, guys, do we really need to put another word in front of collaboration? We already have open company, no BS. Like, it seems like enough to talk about collaboration. And we went back and forth, and we had this long conversation of, do you really need open in front of that? And so when I think about it, it's helpful, right? And so the way that we're talking about open collaboration is that it is an engagement, right? It's not just that we're collaborating, that we're using those people, the process tools that I talked about before, but the people are actively engaged in what's happening. And it's rooted in trust and transparency. And I think that's how you tie in that open company, no BS.
Yeah.
And so when I think about the best teams, right, who are working in that open collaboration format, like they're understanding each other, like they're actively seeking to understand each other. Atlassian has done a lot of reports on this, and especially during the pandemic and now, people are wearing different hats in a way that they didn't. Maybe you went to work, you had your home life, you could separate them, but now it's all kind of mashed together, and you have, I don't know, someone knocking on your door for something, and you were talking earlier, like your granddaughter comes in and is like typing away on your computer and like, I'm in the middle of a meeting.
Don't worry, Papa, I can get the job done for you. I'm like,
exactly. So you have all these things that are happening at once. So understanding each other, so that's one. I'll try and, so I have a paper to get myself focused here. So one, like, are we understanding each other? Best teams are also looking and making information accessible, right? They're saying, let's look at this together. And then I think the last piece is that they're actually seeking for feedback, right? That they are looking for people to comment on that. So I'll give a quick example. You had talked about our move to a distributed world. We call that Team Anywhere. It is our approach as a company to reimagine work. And our approach is basically saying, work wherever you want to work, as long as you're legally able to work there. If you want to come to an office every single day, great. If you want to come to an office every single day this week and not come in for another 2 quarters, awesome. Whatever works for you. And so we had to come up with some sort of policies or guidelines to help people do that. And so as a team, as opposed to, I've worked at companies where they would just say, here it is, do. But what we did instead is we said, let's bring everyone together, let's understand how people are envisioning working. Then we started to put that together, and we put out a version like 0.2. And we put it on a Confluence page, and we said, here's what we're thinking, 8,000 people. Tell us what you think. And everyone,
They told us. Yeah.
So many comments, so many comments. And that was great, because we were like, oh, I guess that might not work. Or that would really work. And just different things that we hadn't imagined. And then we went and we had more conversations, more lunch and learns, and we came up with a version 0.7 and said, well, how about this? How are you feeling about this? And ultimately, when we created this thing, then we went to managers and we said, hey, you all are going to be the ones that have this conversation about the person who wants to move. What does this feel like for you? And we designed a whole new way of training. So oftentimes, when you think about training managers, you say, here's the content. Let me put it out there for you. Or if you're really nuanced, you'll say, here's a case study. Let's look at this case study. But instead what we found is that managers actually wanted to try doing it. And so we would say, here's a situation, work as a team to figure it out. And so ultimately, through all these pieces, when we pushed out this guidelines to the company, they understood it, right? We had engaged them. They had felt like they had provided that feedback back and forth, and they were ready to start to use it. And we were continually iterating on it. So I think that is when, all the way back, golly, I gotta slim this
Reel it back
down.
in.
The
Reel
timer
it back
is
in,
going
yes.
down.
Focused.
But when you talk about open collaboration, it's those three things working together, and hopefully it's a good example to push it together.
Yeah, and let me add on to the Confluence one in particular,
Yeah.
because I think open collaboration is what we're trying to achieve, right? And the open company, no bullshit is a value that underlies everything we do. And when you're deploying systems and tools at a company, you have a lot of choices on how to make that happen, right? Like what you're gonna turn on, how you're gonna configure it, even what tools you're gonna buy. And so if you're approaching it with, we want to be open with our collaboration, we're embracing a value like open company, no bullshit, you're gonna make that decision as an IT person to support that, right? We're obviously huge users of our own tools in Atlassian, and Confluence underpins everything. When we're up here saying we do this or we say this, we mean it's on Confluence, that's where it lives. We create about 5,000 new Confluence pages a month at Atlassian. That's not edits and comments and all the stuff that Molly was talking about on some page. That's just net new. Like, it's kind of, if it doesn't happen on Confluence, it didn't happen. It needs to be written down there. And it's a great way for us to have a rich documented history of decisions and org announcements and changes that we've made as a company, all there for anyone to go see. Those pages are generally opened. It's rare to have something locked down. So it's an example of how, try to think about the end of what you're trying to achieve with the tool while you're making the decision about how to build that tool. And the other example I would share on this one is even when we were considering for Team Anywhere, our remote or our distributed workforce, the policies that were being made needed to eventually flow downstream into the tools that we were offering, right? So, for example, if you wanted to work anywhere, if you want to go work out of Toronto, or you're moving to Europe, or just another city or state, you obviously, as an employee, want to understand what the impact would be to you, to your compensation, to other things. So we built what we call a compensation estimator, open to anyone in Atlassian, that you can use to go see what would this look like if I did this. It's simple, it's easy to use, it's built on Jira. And when we launched it, I think we had 800, 900 people go just try that out. Like, what would this be? Yes, thank you. Myself included. I wanted to just see what was this thing like. But we did that very intentionally as a way to say we want to take the friction out of this. We're not going to put a lot of barriers in it. We're going to make it open for anyone to be able to go see and know what the impact would be.
Super transparent.
Super transparent, yeah.
That's awesome.
I feel like everything you're saying, it was awesome. It was awesome.
It was awesome.
So the no BS is, hey, you're in this company and we value your opinion. Mm-hmm. The no BS is we're transparent about how we make decisions. And the no BS is everyone's welcome to contribute to work because we wouldn't have hired you if we didn't think you were valuable. That's pretty cool. It's very powerful.
Yeah.
I love it. All right, cool. Let's transition again to another question. So what business value benefits does this model drive for organizations?
I got to talk
You
business
go
value.
first.
Okay, all right. I like talking. It's a
Yeah,
personal
too
passion
much.
of mine is business value. So in the research Chris was talking about, the Forrester report that was commissioned by Atlassian, there was 5 business value areas identified. There was team unity, that's huge. There was improved customer experience. There was an increased revenue, which is great. And then there was a lot of value around attracting and retaining talent, as well as even building a wider pipeline for who you could hire, right? So it was really clear business. But that's one thing in a report. I've actually seen that personally, anecdotally, on the value of our open collaboration as a huge attraction for people that want to work at Atlassian. When I interview people, they bring up our values. They talk about the culture and why that's interesting to them. And when I was hiring for some of our roles, we're growing very rapidly. I think Scott mentioned yesterday that half of Atlassians have been hired during the pandemic. I've hired a number of people that I would not have been able to hire if we were still an on-site company. and people that really attracted to the values but just weren't nearby. In fact, 2 of them have worked with me a year, and I've met them for the first time this week, and they're speaking at this event. So
That's exciting.
there's one. This is
awesome.
exciting. There we go. Yeah, so this is awesome. I mean, just amazing talent. And when when I talked to them early on in the interview process, they absolutely mentioned the company and the culture as part of that.
And then and just to add to that, one of the things that we do as part of the interview process is there's actually a values interview. And it's more of a conversation because it's an opportunity for someone who's not part of the team. So I'm sure for folks who have joined Atlassian who are, that you have someone who's not part of your team, and you just talk about the values, and you say, like, here's our values, this is how we live them, this is how we make decisions. And we're trying to understand who that person coming in, how might they work within those values, because it's a good barometer to say, like, yeah, I'm excited about this company, I like to play as a team, I enjoy the sort of the open transparency, or like, actually, that's not for me. And it gives both sides of the equation a really good indicator as to what it would be like to work here. And then what we found on the back end is from Atlassian, we get a bunch of people who are excited about those values, ready to make decisions on those values. And for the employee, to your point, like, it's such a great experience. We hear it over and over again, how much that impacted their desire to come here and their excitement to work with the team. And it furthers, all the way back to the values.
Right.
Like, it allows us to continue to keep those values very strong, which is, the big piece if you listen to one of Scott's conversations.
Right, the whole idea about culture, right?
Exactly, that culture is rooted in those values.
Awesome. Well, Molly, this conversation is making me think about Erica's presentation yesterday about her first 90 days and Confluent Page and all that technology. And it's really interesting to hear about these values. What other tools, policies, and resources can companies implement to foster an open teamwork model?
Yeah. So I actually think they're very bespoke. This is the worst answer to give to a group. I think if I sit here and tell you, here's what Atlassian
Why
does,
not,
you'd be
right?
like,
It depends.
here's the 15 reasons why that won't work at our company. So let me instead, maybe I will flip it a little bit and say some of the things that we look at and some of the things that I try and do when we're thinking about what tools, when we're thinking about what practices.
Right.
One is to really identify the problem. Be honest about what the problem is. What is the root of the problem? Ask the 5 whys, whatever it is, but find that problem. The second thing that we always try and do, as I think we've explained in a lot of our examples, is to iterate a ton. Be okay with it not being the end result. Try it once, try it twice, keep learning and growing with that. And then the third piece, which I have learned over time the hard way, is to really understand what the resourcing is. The people, the dollars, and be honest about that as well. Because I think oftentimes you go, here's the problem, here's what we're going to do. And they're like, I need 200 people. And you're like, well, we don't have 200 people. Or I need X $100 or $1 million or whatever it is. And that doesn't work. So as you're going through that iteration, continue to prove it out, continue to know what the resources are, and then make that happen. I can provide an example, but do you want me to jump in?
I do have.
Do your thing.
Well, I have examples, but
I had a feeling she'd have an example.
I'm going to say something a little spicy.
Be
I'm
spicy.
inspired by the Bob and Scott talk about
I
taking
sold you a
risks.
spicy. You should be spicy.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, get in there.
So tooling, I work in IT at a software company in Silicon Valley, and I've done so for a number of years. And one of the hot topics in every IT team and company I've worked in is shadow IT. And how we're going to reduce shadow IT. We got to get a handle on shadow IT. We got to control shadow IT. We take the opposite approach in Atlassian IT. We actually think shadow IT is fine. With the proliferation of SaaS tools these days and how easy it is to go purchase and try something out, we see a lot of innovation happening in smaller apps that solve very specific problems for teams that we might not have visibility to, that we might not have the ability to solve quickly for teams. But those niche players in the market absolutely do, right? So if somebody in marketing sees a tool that's going to solve their problem, they should go be empowered to buy that tool, right? Now, we want to make sure that, number one, we have transparency around that. We don't want it to be in the shadows. We want it to be out there so we can see it. Number two, we want to make sure it's secure. And number three, if it gets to the point where it's something that we need to have as a company, we'll move it in to IT and we might manage it. But we have around 600 apps at Atlassian, and we only actively manage around 270 of those in IT today. So we're giving people the choice. It does depend. If this works for you, then go use this tool. If this works for you, go use that tool. The whiteboarding, I think you mentioned whiteboarding. We had half of a large population at Atlassian wanted one whiteboarding tool, another wanted another whiteboarding tool. We weren't going to make one large population unhappy, so we just got both of them. That might change. But for now, that's what's working. And the shadow IT is one of the things that's allowing us to do that.
And there's some things that I recall. I remember there was a product that everyone was kind of downloading and using, and then we got the report from the company saying, like, 3,000 Atlassians are using this, and we came back and like, hey, 3,000 Atlassians, and so
That's a lot.
we got it,
Yeah.
as I recall.
That's right, we did. But we're putting the hands in the decision that are people that are closest to the problem to know what to purchase to go be able to solve their problem.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So those are like real examples of the work together but differently.
yeah.
Or is it work differently but together? I can't remember what it goes.
Differently, together.
We should really know
Got
the
it.
answer to
All right, cool. All right, so we're on to our last question here. I'm going to start with Molly.
Okay.
What is, like, if you could only do one thing, because like you said, you might be resource constrained. It might just be you, right? What is the one thing any leader can do to implement an open collaboration model?
Well, to be clear, like, I don't think you often need a lot of money to do things.
Okay.
Like, I think oftentimes you can just go, start to get into it. But I've said that before. So
Everything costed money, no?
Yeah, and money is nice. I want to say that.
I'm not saying I don't want money.
Okay.
I'm just saying, like, you don't need it. You don't need it in all the situations. As leaders, you can try and find the creative approach. So maybe to that point, I'll just pick one thing.
Sure.
I would just go steal a bunch of stuff. I see like legal over there, so I'm just looking this way to you guys. But we have a room full of people that I'm sure there are amazing things happening here. So hopefully you're having good conversations here. Atlassian pumps out a bunch of stuff. If you haven't been to our team playbook booth, it is right when you're coming out of the main hall. It's on your right-hand side. It's little, but if you look with, as I say with my son, if you look with your eyes, you'll see that it says Team Playbook, and they have over 40 different plays that you can borrow. So if you're trying to identify, like, what is the problem or what is the issue that we're having, they have a ton of plays. And then, like, I'm happy to share anything that I've written on this. I know there's a bunch of people in here that have co-written things, but we can even take the feedback piece, right?
Yep.
So we put something out earlier this year on micro feedback, right? How do you give little moments of feedback that create something bigger? So I would say borrow from other people.
Sure.
Better verb.
Thank you. It took me that long answer to get there, but I got there.
All right, I'm seeing the time, so my answer is going to be short, and I'm inspired by the Bob and Scott talk. It's just fucking try it, right? I mean, if you fail, then just try something else, but it doesn't have to be perfect to be successful. Just do it.
That's the Agile Manifesto.
That's the Agile Manifesto.
Just try it out. Awesome. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
What
This
would
was
you
great.
do?
What would I do?
Yeah,
Ooh,
you've heard all this, you've done all this research.
Yeah, I would really talk to folks about, like, the whole idea of being open, trustworthy, and transparent. Like, hey, everyone's allowed to have an opinion. You're allowed to, like, the idea of voting and whatnot. I think you might need a technical way of doing that it doesn't get lost in email. But the idea of just sort of imparting sort of like psychological trust and the fact that everyone is welcome here. We went through a really arduous interview process to bring you in the door. We think you're really smart, otherwise we wouldn't have hired you. Your opinion's very valuable. And really try to cut out the fact that, like, I don't care if you started yesterday or if you've been the CEO for 10 years. You might have a really good idea because you have outside thinking. Or the leader might say, listen, I love that great idea, but, like, we do need to rein it in because at the end of the day, like, I started a long, long time ago at Digital and in 1984, and we were all in this meeting, and the woman who was running it said, why do you think you're here? And, like, oh, I'm here to write software, and I'm here to manage IT, and I'm here to... She's like, no, you're all here to make friggin' money. That's the bottom line. And so it's important to understand what the business goals are, but what you can do to interact with that. And everyone's got an idea. Everyone's valuable. It doesn't matter what walk of life you have or where you come from. If you're in this company, you're trusted, your opinion matters. And I think just imparting that kind of a value would be enough to kind of get the things flowing. The main question I have, actually, is how do you take all of that input and actually filter it and correlate it and say, all right, how do I make a decision now? I've got all these people voting. I've got all these opinions. I've got to somehow corral that into a strategy. That, to me, can be also challenging.
Team 23, coming at you live.
Stay tuned for the answer next year.
We're just about out of time. Sorry, we cannot answer that.
But anyways, that's kind of what I would think.
Nice.
Yeah. Cool. All right, do we have time for questions from the audience?
We do. So I'll
Awesome.
run the mic around if folks want to raise their hand. And if you've got a question for the panel, I will give you the mic.
morning. One of the things I've seen in my company is an impulse to let tools replace conversations. And in some ways, it's been a barrier to collaboration. Can you talk a little bit about how you're using tools to help have the right conversations? You alluded to this a little bit earlier, but can you elaborate?
Do you want to go?
Question, yeah, can we repeat the
Yeah, so do you want to repeat it? You're in charge.
So the question was, tools can sometimes create a barrier to collaboration versus fostering a collaborative environment. And in this particular case, it seems to be working in the opposite of the intended purpose. What can we do about the technology, and how can we kind of turn that around so that the technology isn't a means to an end, it's actually to facilitate the end that you want, which is greater collaboration.
Yeah, I have a couple answers, Molly. If you want to.
You go. I'll add. I
You're the boss. Go ahead, take care of it.
Well, let me say that I've heard this in IT for years, right? Like if we buy or use or build the tool, then A, B, or C will happen, right? The tool comes first. I think that communication sets like I mentioned before, the communication has to set the tone, and that should influence what tool is purchased and how that tool is provisioned. I mentioned that we have a number of different tools at Atlassian, but when it comes to communication and collaboration tools, we do have one standard. Like I have worked at a company where we've had 5 different chat tools, and I would have to remember what department somebody was in to know what chat platform to go on to be able to ask them a question. I mean, that's not doing anybody any favors, right? So we do all use the same chat platform. We do all use the same communication video platform. So I think on some things you do have to say, this is what we use, because we want everybody to be on an equal footing. We don't want secret tooling over here, secret tooling over here. But if the culture doesn't want to foster collaboration or communication, then no tool is going to solve that problem.
I think just to take a different cut at the question, is a tool replacing conversation?
Yeah. Okay.
And I think I read Priya Parker's book about the art of gathering. I really enjoyed, because it spends a lot of time focusing on purpose. Like, what is the purpose of this gathering? And so it may be to re-examine, well, what is the purpose of this meeting? And is it something that can be done asynchronously, that we actually don't need to chat live to do this? And if the purpose is something else that really is conducive to conversation, how are we going to actively build that in? And what I've found most interesting, so I've been actually experimenting with this over the last 6 months, and what I found most interesting is if you have the purpose, it's not actually the meeting, it's all the things that are going into the meeting and all the things that come out of the meeting. And so I would encourage you to look at how are you prepping people for that conversation, and then how are you showing them that you're using that conversation afterwards to actually create action, because that is a nice cycle of okay, I want to talk in that meeting because these things are going to happen. So I see you're nodding your head. Maybe that works.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's awesome. Thanks. Any more questions? I mean, in my particular case, I would say that we have some tools that, like, every time you want to share a document, someone has to let you have access. Every time you're having a conversation, it seems to be in a separate silo. And it would be much more gratifying if things could just be a little bit easier to share and manage, and if there wasn't so many uptightness things about, I'm in this team and you're in that team, and I think the reality is that when you're in a technology company, there's a lot of ideas that need to flow from left to right and up and down to actually solve problems. And if at the end of the day, if what you're trying to do is have an impact on the business and solve a problem versus just like thinking about we're having a conversation, we're trying to solve a problem, then I think it can go a long way.
Doing a quick time check. I'll let you ask a question, and then they will be, if you want to go in the hall, they'll be available for questions afterwards as well. So I'll give this to you.
So in this hybrid way of working, we are facing this challenge, and it's not only for a particular company, but let me know if you guys also feel the same, that when teams are working from home as well as from office, it's getting a bit hard and difficult to interact, because it can feel for the people who are on audio that they are not getting more involved, because people at office physically present sometimes start interacting over the meeting, and then so are there any tips for us? How can we make both the crowds interact properly, or any tool which is going to help us with this?
So
I think I have a hard time hearing because of the echo, but it sounded like You're talking about distributed teams, some are remote, some are in the office, and trying to get sort of some equity between those two, right? That's always a real challenge. When some people are together in person and some people are all remote, it creates almost an inequity where I can talk with Molly and Jenna right now, but like somebody online might not be able to hear the conversation very well. And so it's a great question. Have you guys tackled this? Have you encountered it, right? It's a problem, I think, for almost every company.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want me to go? You want to go?
Yeah, I wanted the Team Anywheres.
Yeah, so Team Anywhere, again, our reimagined work effort really took this head on, and it was one of, when I talked about earlier that policy and those guidelines that we put forward, that was one of the things that we looked at. And in particular, Scott was adamant about it, and it was a great decision retrospectively, that every single person had to be on their own box, on their own little screen. It didn't matter if you were in the same room or if you were at home, so that when you're looking at all the pictures, everyone is on that same picture. I think from a audio only, video only, it is hard if someone's audio to see whether they're on there, and so a lot of it comes into that preparation piece as a leader, as a facilitator of the conversation, as to how am I going to actively include people? Do I call on the audio people first if we're having this before anyone, and it kind of set that tone of, yes, we know there's a lot of conversations here, or there's a lot of functionality where there's a hand raising, and sort of what are the things that you set in place that allow people to, that everyone knows this is how we're going to do it, that it's not just jump into it. The other thing is to use the tools. And one of the things that we often do is we have a page. I think, I can't remember, I've seen so many presentations, but I think Joff showed it earlier in one of the keynotes. But basically we say this is the pre-read. And so everyone either reads it during the meeting or before the meeting, however your culture is, and then comments in line. And so that is a very equitable situation because everyone has the opportunity to do that. And where we've found is that this, when you take these different practices and put them together, we've had tremendous divergent thinking, like more than we've ever had before. And where we're trying to figure out is how do we converge? How do you get those ideas to come together? And that's something that we're actively tackling.
Yeah, and I would also say, on the leadership side, I think you need to, for anybody who's a people manager or works with their leader, like you have to lead by example. I think it can be really tempting as we go back into the office. If the boss is in the office and happens to be in a room, then we join there and then everybody else joins on Zoom. Like, you just got to speak up and remind everyone that we're trying to keep the collaboration equitable. And that means even though it's totally counterintuitive to us as a human, that if we each need to be on our own Zoom box to make sure that we have a good session on that. And I think leaders have a lot more influence in this space than they realize.
Can I add one more thing? Can I add one more thing to that?
Yeah.
For Ashley, she's going to cut us off. But to that point of the leader, I think there is that additional piece of checking in. If we go all the way back to some of the comments earlier around really understanding your teammates and finding time outside of those meetings to hear their voice, and if their voice, whatever they were saying, wasn't heard in the meeting, like understanding why didn't that happen? What am I, as a leader, not doing well? What do you need? It's almost like coaching, right? If the kid doesn't understand what the skill is that you're coaching, it's probably on you as the coach that you haven't explained it well, or you need to explain it in a different way. And so take that on, take that burden off your teammate, and be actively involved in understanding their ideas and helping them integrate it into what's happening.
I think that's great. I think another important aspect of that is that not everyone can be on a Zoom meeting. They might actually have to be in a physical facility. They might run a manufacturing plant. They might be in the healthcare sector, like where, they have to be on site. But I know particularly a friend of mine works in a semiconductor fab, and he's like, I'd be on these Zoom meetings and everybody would be talking about tending their garden, and I'm driving to work every day and trying to manage the fab. And so I think having an understanding and recognition that everyone's got a different situation they're in, everyone has to deal with their own kind of crap that they're trying to get through their day, and trying to make it equitable. So if anyone is in that situation where they have to go to the office, hey, give them something to be thankful for going to the office, right? Buy them lunch every day, something, right? Like, thank you for coming. We welcome you. You're keeping the lights on. We appreciate it, right? If you're home and you're able to do stuff, that's great too. So like at our company, we were trying to figure out, when are we going to go in the office? When are we going to go in the office? And finally, the president, George Colony, said, well, we keep writing about remote anywhere. We might as well just friggin' do it ourselves. And so, but that's easy. We're all knowledge workers, but we still have an IT team that goes in. And they take good care of those folks. And I think that if you forget about the fact that everyone's got a different role, but all those roles are important, otherwise you wouldn't have them, right? Just make sure everyone gets treated equitably. I think that goes a long way.
Awesome. This has been a great discussion. I want to make sure we let everyone out on time. So thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Chris, Molly,
Thank
and
you.
Jenna.
Awesome
and
job.
Y'all enjoy the rest of the day.